Hi students, and welcome to today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian, and I'm streaming to you from beautiful Budapest here in Hungary. I hope everybody is having a good weekend, staying healthy, staying strong, and positive. In this class, we are doing a question and answer session. I'll begin by explaining a little bit about IELTS and what is a Band 9. I often find there's a lot of confusion about that. This is a special kind of class that I host once every 2 weeks for our members so that they can ask any questions about the IELTS exam. Of course, everybody is welcome to watch, and I'm sure you will learn lots of good information. Usually the members have some good questions that a lot of students are curious about. So members, start thinking about those questions while I start up the class here. Hi, Jainil. Hi, Kaur. And of course, to become a member, you can click the join button next to the subscribe button on the channel. If you don't see that, just send me an email. I can give you more instructions, adrian@aehelp.com. The lesson, the materials, they're presented to you by our professional websites for the IELTS, aehelp.com for academic IELTS, and gieltshelp.com for general IELTS. On both of our websites, we have lots and lots of information for you, as well as lots of answers to questions that you might have about the exam. I'll quickly show you what those look like. This is the academic website here with the blue background at aehelp.com. You can click that big red button to join the premium package and begin learning for success. This is the general IELTS here with the green background. Again, you can click that big red button and then get access to all of our premium materials and improve quickly for the IELTS exam. Of course, we have apps that support our websites, Academic IELTS Help, links to aehelp.com, and General IELTS Help app, links to gieltshelp.com. Hi, Firdavs. Welcome aboard. Firdavs, this is a Q&A session, so make sure to start thinking about some questions. Of course, you can get our exam books from Amazon. Search for aehelp's Academic IELTS on Amazon or GEHelp's General IELTS. There are 2 exam books for each. There's 6 academic exams and 6 general exams, 3 in each book. And you can get the electronic or the paper version from Amazon. You can order those. Hi, Carolina. Carolina, this is a question and answer session. So think about some questions. So after this question and answer session, I will host a speaking part 3 class for some more speaking practice where everybody will be able to join in on the chat, of course. Hi, Rajveer. So just to start, while the members are thinking about some questions, the title that I added to this lesson is What is a Band 9? Okay. I'm going to just give you that real quickly, just a little bit of information, because I think there's a lot of confusion about this band score system in the IELTS exam, what it is and how it works. First and foremost, everybody needs to understand IELTS is not an English as a second language exam. So it's not an ESL exam, okay? It's not the same kind of exam that you get in an English as a second language class, okay? So when you sit the IELTS, it's not designed with the intention or with the thought of, okay, we're making this exam for people who are speaking English as a second language, okay? Importantly, what you have to remember, it is, so instead, it is an English proficiency exam. Okay, so think about it this way, students. English proficiency exams are administered to English-speaking people in countries like the US, UK, Australia, all the way from, I would say, like grade 5 to 50-year university if somebody is doing a major, okay? So English proficiency exams are used in public and private schools from grades, let's say 6 to 4th year, or even 4th, 5th year university. Okay. The IELTS exam, so this is just kind of a little bit of for you how to think about this. So you can think about this the same way, compare it to proficiency exams in your own language. So if you're speaking Spanish, you have the same. In Spanish-speaking countries, you have Spanish proficiency exams in your Spanish classes, all the way from grade 6 all the way into university. So one way to correctly think about the IELTS which is the International English Language Testing System, because it's used all around the world, is it's like combining questions from grade, well, let's say grade 6. So some of the first questions that you hear in the listening or that you do in the reading, they're kind of like what you would see on a grade 6 English proficiency exam in elementary school. So it's like combining questions from grade 6 English class exams all the way to, well, grade 12, maybe some of the questions, the last questions in the reading or the listening, I would say maybe reach even 1st year college level. Okay, so if you just kind of grabbed like 1 or 2 questions out of a grade 6 English exam, a grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, and maybe 1 or 2 out of a 1st year college English literature class, and you put them all together into a reading, listening section, then you would end up with an IELTS exam. Does that make sense, everyone? So do you kind of see what I'm trying to get you to think about? So think about your own language exams in your own cultures, whether it's Russian or French or Hindi, Punjabi, and then think about if you took kind of a couple questions, okay? They're not geared towards non-native speakers, they're geared towards native speakers or anybody to test that language. Okay? So that's what a proficiency exam is, okay? Versus an ESL exam that's actually quite different. Does that make sense? So is everybody following me here? How I'm trying to get you to think conceptually about this, okay? And the reason I'm telling you this is because there aren't any quick tricks or tips or templates to succeed on this kind of test. And a lot of students think about IELTS like an ESL exam where you can use some templates, some cookie cutter language, some quick learning to get those high band scores. And that's just not going to work, okay? Why? Because academic IELTS is used for people to enter university, okay? So it's like a grade 12 English equivalency exam, all right? It's not an ESL exam. So that's why it's important to understand this, okay? So the reason it is important to understand this is because there aren't really any template phrases or quick tricks to get band 9 on the IELTS, okay? You have to show that level of English proficiency that's required, okay? And so what is a band 9? A band 9 basically means that for the reading and listening section, you get 39 or 40 answers correct from 40. Okay, so you can only make one mistake. All right, because a band 9 is considered an expert user of the English language. So an expert user, according to the IELTS, is somebody who uses English at the first year college level. You can have an accent in your pronunciation. You don't need to have absolutely perfect grammar, okay? But you need to be able to express yourself at the level of a first year college student who would get about a B in their class, let's say. Okay, so that's a good way to think about it. So in the writing and speaking section, this means understanding the principles of English literature, like persuasive and expository essay structures, and being able to express yourself at a B, or 80, let's say 5% or higher grade in an English first year college class. Okay, now you don't need a band 9, of course, to get into university. That's because they will teach you a lot of these skills there, but you do need a band 6.5, oftentimes a band 7, because a band 7 is closer to a grade 12 level B of the English language. So that means that in the writing and speaking section, you understand what a persuasive essay is, what an expository essay is, what an indirect direct thesis is, what you need to use, and you can express yourself at that level, okay? So you can express yourself, you can give a presentation in a first-year college class, and it would be well received and well understood. All right, so that's what a band 9 is. All right, so was that helpful, members, giving a little bit of insight into what is the concept of a band 9? And then, of course, going backwards to band 8, a very good user, or band 7, that's kind of like just minusing from that level. So a band 8 would be like a grade 12 A, 90% in English class. Okay? All right? So that's what it is. So I wanted to kind of start with that a little bit today and just give an explanation of what is a band 9, how you need to conceptualize, how you need to think about it. Okay? And yes, native speakers also take the IELTS exam. I just had a speaking training session with somebody in Ontario who is doing IELTS in Canada for university entrance. So people who live in these countries and study in these countries, native speakers or high-level non-native speakers also take this exam because they need to show their English proficiency. Okay? So, so let's look at the questions. Okay, so let's start looking at questions. I see that Carolina's got one and Abhishek has one. So let's get to questions. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think the first question came from maybe Jaineel. Jaineel says, in India, speaking part 2, the examiner is asked 1 to 2 rounding off questions before starting part 3. Give some strategy and tips. Jaineel, by rounding off questions, I'm assuming that you mean kind of follow-up questions, right? So that's no different from any question in part 3. Because when they introduce the topic of part 3, they also say, now I will ask you some questions related to the topic of part 2. So if they're asking follow-up questions based on what you said in part 2, or they're asking more general questions in part 3 connected to part 2. It's the same concept, okay? So this is why it's really important to do well in part 2, Jainil, and to give detailed answers with good explanations so that you can reference those, okay? So that's what makes your language original, all right? Okay. So let me give you a couple tips, okay? So if the examiner asks you some direct follow-up questions to the information you provided in part 2, make sure to, let's do it this way, clearly connect to what you said in part 2, okay? B, reiterate the information in part 2 and paraphrase while giving more detail. Okay, so I'll give you an example, Jainil, so it's not just conceptual. Okay, so remember, Jainil, in this week for part 2, we talked about taking a trip to New York, and then we explained that we went to the Statue of Liberty, visited that famous landmark. Now let's, for example, say that the examiner says, and what did you think about the Statue of Liberty when you were visiting it? Okay. So then you reference what you said. So as I had mentioned, I was there with 2 of my friends. So we took a lot of pictures of each other and posted it on Facebook. I thought that the statue was just as incredible as what I had seen in movies and heard from other people. It was a 30-minute boat ride to get to the Statue of Liberty, and then we took an elevator to the top, to the lookout, where we were able to see the Atlantic Ocean and overlook the skyline of New York. It was quite amazing. Okay, so you give more detail. You reference, paraphrase, you give more detail. All right, and stay on topic. Okay. All right. Hopefully that answers your question for that. Okay. Okay, so Ferdovs is asking, can you explain the difference between a 6 and 7 band score, especially in coherence and cohesion? Yeah, I can definitely do that for you. Okay, so what is the difference between band 6 and 7, especially with coherence and cohesion? Okay, sure. So band 6, and you can find the descriptions online, although it's a little bit difficult to sometimes figure out what that actually means, okay? So for Dovs, obviously you're asking here about the writing and the speaking, because in the reading and listening, it's just a set number of correct answers. So band 6 is considered, the way that IELTS describes band 6 is what they say is it's a fluent user of English. Okay, versus a band 7, which is considered a good user of English. Okay, all right, so a fluent user of English for the writing and for the speaking for Dobbs means they can complete the 150 and 250 words in the given time. Okay. And it is mostly understandable, although some sentences and phrases could be unclear and confusing. Okay. In the speaking, they can speak continuously with a few awkward stops to think about vocabulary or grammar. Not information, okay? So stopping to think about information, like saying, just give me a second to think about that. Well, I suppose, okay, so if I'm thinking clearly about the information, then that's okay. But if I'm stopping because I can't think of the right word to put in the sentence, then that's not being fluent, okay? So, if the person stops a couple of times, a little bit for vocabulary and grammar, then that's okay. You can still get a band 6, but you're fluent for the most part, okay? So if you're constantly stopping and you're doing a lot of and and it's clearly not because you're thinking about ideas, but because you're stuck for words, then you'll get less than 6, okay? And most of the responses are clear with some confusing sentences. Okay, so that's band 6. So band 6, you're fluent. You rarely stop in your speech. In your writing, you hit the word limit minimums, and you do have a complete essay. Okay, but if I read some of the sentences, maybe I'm kind of like, what are you saying exactly? And let's say that to be even more specific to help you really with this, if it's a 250-word essay, let's say for task 2, let's say that you have like 3 sentences at most where I don't really get what you're saying, but overall the essay is clear. Okay. All right. So verses of band 7. So band 7 can, let's say, easily complete the 150 and 250 word limit with selective language and maybe just a few confusing phrases and words, but no unclear sentences. Same in speaking. Okay, so a band 7, so somebody who's considered a good user of the English language, they would have no trouble to complete that 150 and 250. In fact, they would probably write a little bit more, 160, 70, maybe even 80, 270, 75, 280, and the examiner can tell that they're choosing the language. So they're not just using words or sentences that they create because it's the one and only way that they can express that idea, but they're choosing different ways to paraphrase and make their ideas clear for the audience, for the reader. And again, for band 7, it's not going to be perfect. There might be a few phrases that are grammatically somewhat flawed, a few phrases that are maybe unclear, like a misused phrasal verb, maybe 1 or 2 words where the word form is incorrect, so they're using a noun form instead of an adjective form of the word, so causing a little bit of confusion. But a band 7 level would not really have any sentences. Maybe one, they might let that slide, but no sentences where the examiner listens to the sentence in the speaking or reads it in the writing and goes, I don't really know what that student's saying. Okay, so that's the big jump between 6 and 7. Is that clear for Dobbs? So does that make sense? So in band 7, there's no sentences where the examiner is having to go, what is going on here? I have to kind of guess what this person's trying to say in this sentence or what they mean, okay? That's not happening at the band 7 level. That's why they're a good user of the English language versus a fluent user. So some people use English fluently. They say and speak continuously, but some of the sentences that they say or they use, the listener's kind of going, sorry, can you repeat that? Okay, so at a band 7 level for Dobbs, you wouldn't hear another person saying, can you repeat that? Or can you say that again? Okay. Ois, this is why you have to be really careful with idioms or phrasal verbs, because if you misuse them, then it seems like a band 6 rather than a band 7. Okay, in regards to your comment about the reasons for it. Okay, so let's take the next question. Okay, Carolina says, when I practice alone reading and listening, sometimes I get 5.5, sometimes I get 8, sometimes I get 6. How can I be consistent? Yeah, Carolina, consistency is key, absolutely. So, how can I consistently score the best possible level of English that I have? Right? So, Carolina, there's always going to be some deviation. It's virtually impossible to perfectly score band 8 every time. I have seen that. It's very, very rare, though. There are very few students that consistently score the exact same. So, from my experience, most students do have a variance of 1 band in their scores, depending on the questions, the day that they're having, the familiarity of the topics. Okay. Now, you shouldn't have a 2.5 band variance, Carolina. So 5.5 to 8, that's way too much variation. Okay, so something's going on there. You have to see what's going on, and I'm going to explain what you can do there, okay? So you should not have more than 1 band fluctuation in your scores. Okay. All right. So one more point here that's important. Importantly, if you need a band 6.5 on the IELTS exam, your goal should be 7 to 7.5. Okay, so this is kind of connected to what you're saying, Carolina, and I really want to emphasize this because a lot of students miss this. So some students think, okay, I need a 6.5, so I'm going to just really work to get a 6.5. And then what they do is as soon as they get a band 6.5 on their practice exam, they go, woohoo, I'm ready for the IELTS, and they go, and then they get 5.5. Test anxiety, other issues come into play, and then they're really disappointed that they got 5.5, and they go, why? But I got 6.5 on my practice exam. So your goal is always to aim higher than your required score. So if you need a band 6.5, and this is for all of our viewers, if you need a band 6.5 on the IELTS, you should keep practicing until your practice exams are band 7, band 7.5, and then you have the best chance to actually get at least 6.5. If you get higher, if you get band 7 or 7.5, hey, fantastic. That's just that much better. But it's very dangerous to walk into an official IELTS exam where you need 6.5 and the best score that you had on your practice exam was a 6.5. Is everybody clear on that before I give some more explanation to Carolina's question? So if you need band 6.5, go to your exam once you've gotten a band 7.5 on your practice exam. Okay, so always get a higher band score on your practice exam than what you need on your official exam, right? Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for a failure and disappointment, and that's not good, all right? Okay, all right, good. So everybody's like, yeah, that's clear. Okay, Carolina, let's get back to your question here about consistency. Okay, so how can I be consistent? So let me just reiterate here. How can I be consistent? Okay, well, the first one, it's probably not going to surprise you, is practice. Okay, so practice leads to consistency. All right, that's just the name of the game. That's human nature. Whatever we do, whether it's drawing, running, or an exam, or language, the more we practice it, the more consistent we can become, right? And that's just fact. So, so practice leads to consistency. Okay. All right. So practice leads to consistency. The other one is feedback. Feedback is really important. Okay, so what I recommend, Carolina, is that when you get a band 5.5 on one listening test, and then a band 8 on another, compare the two tests. Discover what happened, what went wrong. So what you're trying to do is identify the, if you want to learn some psychology terminology here, is identify the confounding variables. Okay, the elements that lead to the score discrepancy. Were the questions different? Was there a different accent? Were there multiple people speaking? Did I have a bad night's sleep? Okay. Did I use less English in the past week? Right? So in psychology, when we have these kinds of what's called discrepancies or differences between test, retest situations, because that's what you're speaking about here, Carolina, is test, retest. So I do a test one day, band 5.5. I do a test the other day, band 8. It's called a test, retest situation. And you have this big difference, then you want to identify what's called the confounding variables. It's the variables or the elements that interfere or lead to that score difference. And there can be a lot of different reasons, and sometimes it's not just one reason, especially in this kind of situation, but it's a multitude or a combination of reasons. And so you have to discover that, and it's good to discover that because then you can work on eliminating or controlling those confounding variables. So that's what we say in psychology, is you need to learn to control the confounding variables for the test situation. Okay? Does that make sense, Carolina? So you have to identify, and you're the only one that can do that. Okay? Does that make sense, Carolina? So identify the differences and really sit down and go through each of the tests. See if the vocabulary was more difficult, perhaps. Okay? So identify the confounding variables. It's very, very valuable to do that, and it's a very good question, Carolina. Okay. Sometimes if we drink too much coffee, it can really affect our test performance, for sure. There's a little bit of luck involved too, of course, at times, but it should never be 2.5 bands. Okay. Okay. So Abhishek says, I tried a couple of cue cards in which I was not able to figure out from which category it falls. For example, describe an unpleasant job that you did. Okay, Abhishek, it always falls into these categories. So it's always going to be a person, place, event, idea, or object, or maybe a little bit of a combination where you have one primary, one secondary. It always is. Okay, I can tell right away what your example is. Can anybody else tell me what Abhishek's example is? So what category it falls into? Describe an unpleasant job that you did. Okay, what category is that? Instead of me spoiling the fun for everyone, I'm sure there are a couple of you that can help Abhishek out with that question. Okay, so, okay, have a look, Abhishek. Yeah, so look at what your classmates are saying. They're unanimously saying it's an event. Yeah, it's an activity, right? You did this in the past. It's an event, so it has to be the same as an event, right? So what it was, the attendees, the importance, and if you include all of those, I guarantee you'll have a good answer. So maybe you didn't like your job because you had some really annoying coworkers, okay? So the attendees of the event, right, of the job. So it's always there. Pay special attention to the subject and the verb, Abhishek. So here it's a job and you did, right? So a job is an event. It's an activity. Activities are events. The topic is an activity, right? When the topic is an activity, it's an event. Okay, so it's always there. All right. Just be critical. And Abhishek, if you don't get it, ask someone. Ask one of your classmates. Send an email. Okay. Yeah, Milind, I haven't had a look yet, but I actually did. Can you send it one more time, Milind? Because I thought I looked at all of the emails that came in today. So please send it one more time, and I'll take a look at it today. Okay. Make sure you send it to adrian@aehelp.com. Okay. And I'll do a search for it. I'll make sure to find it because it's exciting. Band-Aid is fantastic. I'm sure you're really happy with that. Okay, let me just see whose question was coming up next. Okay. So OS says to clear band 7, is it equal to grade 12? Yeah, so OS, a band 7 is roughly grade 11, grade 12, B minus, B minus. English proficiency. So if you attend high school in Canada or the US or UK and you get about 75% on your grade 11, grade 12 English, then that would be about a band 7 equivalent, 775. Okay? So in this sense, IELTS is fairly generous. They could be more strict or stricter in universities, and for some majors they are. So for some majors they say band 7.5 minimum, and a band 7.5 minimum OS is a very clear grade 12B level. So if you're studying linguistics or some other majors, medical, law, then it's a 7.5, okay? And which is still kind of nice because if you're actually a student in Canada and you want to apply to medical school, they would require that you have at least a grade A, 90% in your grade 12 English. So think about it that way. So there is some lenience in the IELTS scores that are expected. Okay. All right. Bekjan says, could you explain how can we use verb in ing and ed form after a noun, usually after the compound sentence? People working with me are engineers. Okay. Is this sentence right? Yeah, so people working with me, it's like saying people who work with me, right? So it replaces that adjective form, Bekjan. So people working with me are engineers. It is a correct sentence. You can use it that way. It's still considered a progressive form of the verb, and it means people who work with me are engineers progressively. So people who are working with me are engineers, but you can drop that be because it's present later as engineers. Okay. I think Bekjan, so that question, for me to derail and start giving lots of examples there, it would be a little bit going off, especially at this point in the class. So let me kind of come back to you with that. I would definitely recommend just doing some research online of how the ing progressive form of words are used in the language. Sometimes the ing will actually turn the word into a noun as well for certain words. So it's quite a big topic to digress into right now. I would say look up, so Google using the suffix ing in the English language, and I think you're going to get a lot of great explanations instead of me trying to go off on that. So I have to kind of give you a more vague response for this one. So Google how to use the suffix ing in English, okay? And of course it's going to walk you through the progressive form, but it will also then lead you into some other interesting like use of gerunds, infinitives, and so on, okay? Yeah, it's definitely a part of grammar, Bekjan. Definitely a part of grammar, okay? All right. Rajveer says, I also heard that while taking cue card back, the examiners tend to ask some follow-up questions before starting part 3. Yeah, Rajveer, it's definitely possible that they'll ask a couple of questions based on your answer to get some genuine language. So the reason they're doing that, Rajveer, is because they're trying to make sure that students aren't just using memorized phrases, but they're really expressing original thought. Okay? Yeah, so Bekjan's giving an example. Bekjan says, I was also asked when I was talking about the city where I got lost, and she asked me, would you go there again in the future? Yeah. So then you want it to be specific. Certainly, I would revisit there again in coming years, as I really enjoyed my stay, and I'm sure that now I'm more familiar with the city, I likely wouldn't get lost, and I would be able to explore even more places, right? So stick to that topic. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop there, students. If I haven't answered your question, you can always send it to me by email. This is for members, of course. Hopefully you did pick up some good points from today's Q&A session. And coming up in about 45 minutes, I will host another class for Speaking Part 3 where you can practice that, okay? You're very welcome, Abhishek. And for all of our viewers, make sure to check us out at aehelp.com for academic IELTS and gieltshelp.com for general IELTS. And stay tuned. Come back in about 45 minutes for another speaking session. You're welcome, Firdavs. Rajveer, thank you for your questions. Members, thank you for putting yourselves out there. Thank you, Carolina, as well. You're very welcome, Nick Hill. Milland, I look forward to your email. And that's it for now. And I hope to see you soon. I'm Adrian, signing out from Budapest. Bye.